So we get to the next bit. He was crucified for us under Pontius Pilate. So a bit about crucifixion. The symbol of the cross is so associated with Christianity in our time that we don't instinctively make the original associations with it. It was a horrific, sick method of execution. The Romans adopted it from the Persians, possibly via the Carthaginians, because it was the worst form of execution they'd ever come across. That meant that it was most effective as a warning and a deterrent. People were crucified publicly, often on the roads into cities, including Jesus. It meant that crucified people suffered the most and were humiliated the most. That person went into death in the most shameful way, and the shame would carry on into their relatives that they left behind. The nails were driven between bones and on the nerves that ran along them, so the pain was excruciating. The pain was constant because the person had to draw their diaphragms up, pushing down on those impaled joints in order to breathe. It didn't take long, of course, until there was painful pressure and damage on the body. If the person had been flogged beforehand, like Jesus, they would have lacerated backs and splintered wood of the crossbeams going into the open wounds. The usual cause of death was asphyxia, when the body just couldn't open up the lung passages any longer. So it was starved of oxygen. This would take a long time to happen, though. The point of crucifixion was also humiliation. This agonizing struggle to survive was all watched by onlookers, who mocked and cursed. The crucified person was fully naked and vomited and soiled themselves in full view. The point of it was also an indicator of lowest status. Roman citizens and freedmen were not executed in this matter, no matter what they had done. In 325, the time of the First Nicene Creed, crucifixion was still being practiced in the Roman Empire. It was outlawed by the Second Meeting in 381, but still likely to have been carried out unofficially. The Hellenistic associations with crucifixion were only shameful. That's why the adoption of the cross as a symbol was seen as one of the most absurd and offensive aspects of Christianity. Next, we have the mention of a historical character, Pontius Pilate. He was the governor or procurator of Judea. Judea is part of the larger prefecture of Syria. It's how Romans sort of organised the provinces that they rule over. And he was the governor of Judea from the years 26 to 37 AD. Now, he did, of course, authorise the execution of Jesus, but we shouldn't take his inclusion in the creed as a suggestion that he was fully culpable. The high priests demand this of him, so it's their plan too. They want Jesus executed, but it's Passover, when they're not allowed to execute anyone themselves. Ultimately, though, it's God's plan, and neither Rome nor the high priests could carry it out unless Jesus allowed it. Important. So Pontius Pilate is actually included in the creed, not as a culprit, but as a time marker. Other venerated individuals with a following who were crucified before or after Jesus are not being spoken of in the creed. Perhaps other people called Jesus or Yeshua had been crucified and remembered, but the one referred to in the creed is not one of those. The Jesus who was crucified under Pontius Pilate, which is the same as saying between 26 and 37 AD, is the one spoken of here. That one is God incarnate. This is the one whose sacrifice is owned by Christians. He was crucified for us. He suffered and was buried. The third day he rose again, according to the scriptures. He suffered. I think another popular idea is that in Jesus' case, he didn't cry out in pain. Nothing in scripture says that. He felt it. He was a man on the cross experiencing what a man experienced on a cross. In famous paintings, he's surrounded by solemn worshippers. In reality, he was surrounded by people mocking and abusing him. Close friends had betrayed, denied, and deserted him. Soldiers were indifferent to his suffering, dividing up his belongings and gambling for his clothes. In addition, he suffered in a way that men on the cross didn't suffer. He lost any contact with the Father. He cries out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Now that's a quotation of Psalm 22, which the Jewish onlookers would have known. And Jesus already knew why God had forsaken him. He understood the plan. But this was also an exclamation of suffering, because God really was forsaking him in that moment, and he felt it. We don't understand this yet, but that is the worst suffering. Just as our incomplete but core definition of heaven is where God is, our incomplete but core definition of hell is where God isn't. Jesus is in hell when he is on the cross, still alive and suffering the agony of no contact with the Father. He now holds the keys to death and hell. He had to go to both places to get them. As mentioned earlier, we know the symptoms of hell, the tastes of it, and that's enough. And the symptoms and tastes of it alone were unacceptable enough to Jesus for him to come down from heaven to save us from them. Again, a common idea is that he found aspects of our behaviour personally unacceptable, so he came down to teach us to modify it. Bad theology. Jesus saw the experience of suffering in us, to which the behaviours may only be a reaction, and wanted to take that suffering on him instead. He came to do a complete job, so that only he need experience the full horror of living with no God present at all in our lives. He was buried. He died. He only buried people who were dead. He died. Our English word buried is a bit more precise than what it translates as. Buried to us means put under the ground, then covered. Buried in the creed just means put away, then covered up. Crucified people were usually chucked into mass graves and possibly only covered up a bit. Jesus was buried in the tomb of a man called Joseph of Arimathea. That was in a cavern-like tomb covered by a large stone. Buried is said in the creed, likely to overemphasize dead. Like, not just dead, but buried dead. This was because the claim that Jesus didn't die had infiltrated churches for two opposite purposes. For some, to avoid the embarrassment of the miracle that followed, kind of taking the holy out of it. And for some, in an attempt to be hyper-holy, where it was an embarrassment that a holy being would have gone through a human experience. And crucifixion was a huge taboo, very shameful. Of course, editing a part of the story provides a way in for you to be the Messiah. Oh, I didn't actually die at the crucifixion. I went to another part of the world for a few centuries and now I'm back here with you to continue teaching and leading you. The creed asserts that anyone who believes that Jesus didn't die is believing something other than Christianity and is operating something other than the church. Now we come to the most famous thing about Christianity, the resurrection. That's pivotal to the Christian faith. Jesus didn't just make a big gesture or set an example. He won a battle. His earthly ministry wasn't as a kind of philosopher. He was establishing the eternal kingdom of God on earth. We Christians believe that. His kingdom is already here. It very often doesn't look like it because as it is increasing, the old kingdoms are decreasing, but they've not yet gone. We can still see the old kingdoms very much. It's an inevitability, though. The train has already left the station and the brakes have been removed. It's coming and it can't be stopped. We don't have to die the way we were all dying because Jesus has died that way for us. We can live in the kingdom that Jesus, who is alive, has come to rule. Coming back from death is impossible. Neither creed nor Christian belief tries to say otherwise. It's another of the impossible tasks that only God can do. Defeat Satan, take back the authority he stole, and defeat death. So, is the only way you can succeed in being a Christian if you achieve the impossible, which is to actually believe that an impossible thing happened despite the help of any evidence? No. It's not a reward we get for solving a tricky riddle. That would be earning salvation, which is a big biblical no-no. And it would make salvation only available to the very clever and ultimately only the insincere. Christians are people who know Christ. They know him in the way that we all know each other. The evidence for him no longer being dead is that he is here. We interact with him. Jesus came to show his living self to his disciples. He didn't require them to just accept he was back without knowing him, and he doesn't require that of us. Hopefully, anyone that has ever preached the gospel to you has made that clear. Come and know living Jesus. Just start trying to talk to him and ask for help from a Christian friend. So you don't have to, it's not like a riddle that I and other Christians know the answer to. Just start trying to talk to God. We're not magicians. Christians aren't a secret, enlightened society with abilities that no one else has. Anything transforming or miraculous comes from God. And I'm sorry if you've ever come across any Christians that have claimed otherwise than that. The resurrection also communicates that Jesus is the second Adam. In the creation account of Genesis 2, God has brought living things up from the ground. The Hebrew association with the ground is life, and that which is productive. Actually, that which is productive is a better definition of life in the Hebrew language and Hebrew mindset. Man exclusively, God forms from the dust. Dust is light, dry, unformable, it's unproductive, which is a better definition in the Hebrew language and mindset for death. Dust had those associations of death. So God raises the first Adam from death to life, and he raises the second Adam from death to life. This second Adam then reigns over the earth as the first man and woman were intended to do. So that's an important value and confirmation in the resurrection. Just a technical point, a little one. Jesus rose on the third day. He didn't rise after 3 days. People hear the after 3 days thing and rightly point out that it contradicts the Bible accounts. Well, they're right. He dies on day 1, is still dead on day 2, and rises on day 3. Next bit. He ascended to heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. Jesus isn't a magician. He does miracles, but none of them are showy-offy. They have a purpose and teaching. At the wedding at Cana, he does a miracle that the people at the wedding don't even know about. The ascension can seem like it might be an exception to this rule. It does seem quite showy-offy, kind of theatrical. In the 2 books written by Luke, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, Luke describes Jesus as being watched as he went up to heaven. And we can only imagine some theatre to that. It may not have been conspicuous though. That's just the way we're likely to visualise it. Jesus could perhaps have made it miraculous and discreet, like he did with the water into wine in the wedding at Cana. Well, the ascension is still a miracle with a purpose and teaching, like all of the other miracles. As an action, it demonstrates that Jesus has finished. He came down to earth to do something. He has completed the task and shows that by going back. He shows it to the people who really need to know that, his disciples. They're the witnesses of the ascension. The ascension statement is included next to the statement about him sitting at the right hand of the Father, because both statements are telling us the same thing. He is sat down at the right hand of the Father. Sitting down was understood to mean you have finished something. That goes back to God resting on the 7th day after he completes the universe. The universe was understood by the Israelites to be God's temple. He has made his temple and now takes his place on his throne in the temple. The throne is actually the place of doing. So resting or sitting down didn't mean now you're doing nothing. It meant being in your place from which you act. But the thing that was finished was the creation of that throne and temple. Jesus is sat down in a place where he is constantly active, but it's the throne of lordship over earth, which is now his. The right hand is understood as the doing hand. His actions and the Father's actions are completely one, as Jesus taught in his earthly ministry. So it may well have been an amazing sight watching Jesus ascend, but where he was going and why he was going were more important than how he was going. That's the purpose in the creed. No references to miracles are saying, look, he did miracles, that proves he's God. The miracles provide teaching about who he is and what he has achieved in the whole universe. He will come again with glory to judge the living and the dead. His kingdom will never end. So we're coming to the end of what is the biggest paragraph, the Jesus paragraph, the Son paragraph. See, I told you I'd start doing that. So yeah, he will come again with glory to judge the living and the dead. His kingdom will never end. This is another core part of Christian belief across the board, what in Greek is called the parousia, and in English is translated as the consummation. Remember that train that set off the kingdom? The beginning of that kingdom is called the church. The church is going to become the world, one and the same thing, and Christ is going to join with it. The Bible often uses the imagery of a marriage, that Jesus is going to marry his bride, the church. Of course, when he marries her, he will fully join with her, a consummation. It's neither a true marriage or a true consummation if it's forced, and that is not going to happen. Jesus will ask the world to marry him, and anyone who says no, won't. They won't be in the completed kingdom. No forced marriage in Christianity, no forced marriage in the divine cosmos level of Christianity. That's the crux of the judging of the living and the dead. People 2,000 years ago already said, I do, to Jesus, and now they're dead, obviously. So it has to include them. Jesus is the one who comes to judge because Jesus is the one who the world will marry. In addition, all give an account for their lives, including those who will be in the kingdom because they said, I do. There's not a consequence in the balance, but it will occur all the same. No one, in fact, goes to heaven or hell based on how they lived their lives. It's solely this, knowing Jesus, that gets you into the kingdom. A common question is, why don't good people go to heaven? Well, the answer is that some idea got out there, not from the Bible, that good behaviour gets you into heaven. It doesn't. You would only marry someone who wants to know you and who wants to marry you. Jesus is the same. For every single person watching, he does want to know you. He does want you to know him. And he does want to marry you. No exceptions. Not one. No matter what you know you have done. And he knows it already. He's still asking. But no forced marriage in this cosmos. If you don't want to, you won't be made to. Interestingly, people tend to think of the offer of heaven nearly always in terms of a thing held over us as a reward, if given, or a punishment if withheld. Because of that, we rarely ask this important question. Do you want to go to heaven? The only thing we solidly know about heaven is that it is where the Father is. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth and the life. The only way to the Father is through me. So we need to ask ourselves, do we want to be with the Father? If we don't, or don't value it, what's the complaint about not getting to be with him? We can argue, well, he's hogging all the nice weather and the fun. Well, that's still guesswork. All we solidly know about heaven is that it is where the Father is. Do you want an eternity of life that's never about you, but always about him? Ask people what they think heaven must be like, and it's always things that prioritize us. We will be at peace. We will be relieved. We will be reunited with the people that matter most to us, or get to meet people we always wanted to meet. And all that might be true, and I'm not criticizing those thoughts. But what we definitely know is that it is a place that is not about us, and we will never again be the focus. Does that sound like a place you want to go to? Actually, it's only people who know Jesus who can say definitely yes, because they already start to see how much healthier and fulfilling life without the burden of ourselves is in this life now. Supposing you went into a big store and one of the salespeople tries to convince you to buy a toaster. It's brilliant. It's got all the special functions. Best model of toaster out there. But you don't want a toaster. So you say, no thank you. The salesperson points out that it's not actually for sale. You can just have it for free. You're a bit surprised, but you still say, well, that's very generous, but I still don't want a toaster. No thank you. The salesperson adds that it includes a lifetime guarantee. You don't have to pay for it, but if any repair is needed, we pay for it. You reply, well, good, though all of this is, I don't want a toaster. No thank you. Obviously, if you don't take the toaster, you don't get the lifetime guarantee either. It's the toaster that is guaranteed for life. So why would you be upset or angry that you don't get the lifetime guarantee if you don't want the toaster? It's not a lifetime guarantee for your fridge or your TV. It's a lifetime guarantee for something you didn't want when you were offered it. Heaven is eternity with the Father, where He is, and focused on Him. The thing that Christians, myself included, believe is that right now, this is the best way to live. It's so much better than anything else now. I really hope the salespeople in your lives have got that across, and I pray that if they haven't, someone will. As regards behaviours, lifestyle, values, etc., they are, or should be, only symptoms of a life with the Father at the centre of it. We interpret it very differently from one another. We can look at big examples of that in future videos. I totally don't go the same way as some other believers. Hopefully, we're both trying to interpret this from the centre of the Father, not make the Father the kind of legitimizer, the kind of the poster boy of our idea about values and behaviour. So this question, do you actually want to go to heaven? It's an eternity of focus on someone other than you. Maybe the alternative to that sounds better. I would just like to urge you that it seems better. Our lives as we live them now, with the constant burden of ourselves, are bearable because it's understood that they have an end. I would urge you at least to think about this. Do you want to risk that situation but without an end? Maybe just to clarify on being freed from the burden of yourself, that does not mean that you or the concept of the self is no longer important. Actually, what you discover is how much you matter to God, and once you start doing that, you start to understand how much you matter. So it's actually really a change where your value increases a great deal from what you accept as normality. It also doesn't mean that you don't love yourself or you do not care for yourself. That's very key tenets of your health, your mental health and physical well-being is self-care. There's no contradiction from that in receiving Christ and what I've kind of worded as being freed from the burden of yourself. Actually, again, what you really encounter is that you're freed up truly to be able to do that. The things that kind of tie you up that in fact all the time are preventing you from prioritizing self-care are in fact the things that you find are less formidable, and you start to make those decisions for the love of yourself and for self-care, just to kind of clarify that. Just a language acknowledgement. More common in speech than the term consummation is the phrase second coming. And it's fine and it's accurate, but all it says is that Jesus is coming a second time, not why or what he will do when he comes. Consummation, I think, is describing more of why and what he will do. He is actually with us always, and our contact is completely open and constant. The distinction between that and the future event is that he will be apparent in the same way that he was in the first century. Jesus tells his disciples, "As you have seen me go, so I will return." Okay, that is the Jesus paragraph. It's the longest because the Nicene Creed needed to give time to issues around the person of Jesus especially. Hope it's been really helpful. We'll come again to look at this final paragraph, which is the Holy Spirit and Church paragraph. Thanks for watching so far. See you for the third video.